Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Making It Personal is provided by Sarah Vocations Ministry. Learn more at joinserra.org.
Making It Personal with Bishop William Joensen on Iowa Catholic Radio and iowacatholicradio.com.
Welcome to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen. I'm Jean Till, and on today's show, we're visiting with Father Donald Haggerty from the Archdiocese of New York and serves at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. And today we're discussing his book, Conversion, among many other things. Conversion, Spiritual Insights into an Essential Encounter with God.
And that's just one of his works. He's the author of 5 books, and we'll probably touch on a little feast that we'll sample from a very wise and holy priest. So we're very blessed to have Father Haggerty today. Just before we engage him, this time of year already, commencements are starting. So Mercy College of Health Sciences had their commencement yesterday in Des Moines. So again, those essential nurses and other healthcare professionals, a new cohort there, taking up their place in that sacred vocation of healthcare and healthcare ministry.
May God bless them.
So we're grateful for the commitment of Mercy College to its Catholic identity and mission, and my presence there, I think, just kind of acknowledging that. So then today we'll be at Sacred Heart Woodbine, St. Patrick, Missouri Valley, with St. Anne Logan as well for confirmation. Tomorrow at St. Patrick in Neola, and then Shelby County will be gathering St. Mary the Assumption in Portsmouth. So gathering those 5 parishes, or maybe not all 5, but kind of gathering them as well. So looking forward to those opportunities. Of course, it's Drake Relays weekend here in Des Moines, so Des Moines is bustling with all sorts of activity. I didn't note who won the Beautiful Bulldog contest.
That's not on. You don't have your finger on the pulse of bulldogs.
You know that regionally, that folks on the northeast part of our country would focus more on the Penn Relays, but the Drake Relays in an Olympic year is always a great thing. That some of them are looking for this to be an opportunity to prepare themselves and experience that intense competition that will move to a broader stage not long after. So, but good morning, Father Haggerty. Thank you for joining us this morning, and maybe just in this show, we call it Making It Personal, just to learn a little bit about you and the life path of the Spirit and in your vocation as well. Maybe just to ask you, as a priest ordained for the Archdiocese of New York, but God's had you, embrace ministries and has called you beyond. Could you just share a little bit of some of that path, and what were the dynamics? Was this a prompting in your own heart, or something that was proposed to you, or a little bit of both?
Well, thank you, Bishop Johnson, for having me, and Jane for having me on your show. I appreciate that. And you may be asking there, I have not had an ordinary parish life as a priest, although I am a diocesan priest of the Archdiocese of New York. And in part because I got to know the Sisters of Mother Theresa before I entered their order, the Missionary Charity Fathers, and I had a desire to work with the poor, and I eventually went to live in their men's shelter in the Bronx and helped them for a year. And at that time, they were starting their men's order. So I joined that, and I did my first year in theology in that order at the New York Seminary. I'm from New York, and then I switched over to the Archdiocese, and they have 6 convents in New York, so there was always plenty to do with the Missionaries of Charity. Mother Theresa had opened up her first AIDS home in New York in those days, and then after I was ordained a priest, a couple of years later, I was saying Mass for them, but then I went to study graduate studies in Rome, and then got opportunities to do retreats for them in the times when we were out of school. And I think you were
in Rome, or even worldwide venues?
Worldwide, and that began to become a worldwide thing for me. And in part because Cardinal O'Connor, who was my ordaining bishop in 1989 and lived till 2000, he was very close to Mother Teresa, perhaps as much as anybody in the United States. And he was very happy to have one of his own, any of his priests who were close to Mother Teresa. And then she wrote asking also for some help there. So that kind of continued, and then I went to work in seminaries, and I had free time in the non-class time in summers, and I did many retreats with the Missionaries of Charity. I also did years with them in Ethiopia.
Oh my goodness, fascinating, Father. So we'll look to pick that up a little bit, and then to begin to talk about some of your insights and wisdom that you share in your books and elsewhere.
When we return, we'll visit with Father Donald Haggerty from the Archdiocese of New York and author of many great books, including Conversion, Spiritual Insights into an Essential Encounter with God. You're listening to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen on Iowa Catholic Radio and the Spirit Catholic Radio.
Iowa Catholic Radio would like to thank our business partner, Edible Arrangements, for their support, offering fruit bouquets and gourmet dip chocolate treats. On the go or have it delivered for that special occasion, ediblearrangements.com.
Fast Signs is a custom sign and visual solutions company with an extensive selection of digital signage, interior and exterior signs, banners, and vehicle wraps. Learn more at fastsigns.com. Thank you, Fast Signs in Clive, for your support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
Don't miss the Iowa Catholic Radio Family Celebration, Saturday, June 22nd at the Valley West Mall Outdoor Movie Theater in West Des Moines. Enjoy games and activities for the whole family, plus a giant digital screen featuring the movies Wonka and Fatima. Gate opens at 4 p.m. Admission is free. No outside food or beverages allowed, but plenty of food trucks will be available. Bring a chair, your family, and friends. Watch the sunset, the stars shine in the sky, and on the big screen at the Iowa Catholic Radio Family Celebration. Learn more at iowacatholicradio.com.
Welcome back to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen. And on today's show, we're visiting with Father Donald Haggerty from the Archdiocese of New York and author of Conversion, Spiritual Insights into an Essential Encounter with God.
Again, grateful to have you, Father Haggerty. You were, as before the break, just kind of noting time in Ethiopia as well. So obviously, with different and diverse peoples. Any significant time with the saint herself, Saint Theresa of Calcutta, or was that?
I did. I see her, dozens of times because I had joined the order. I first saw her as a volunteer in 1984, and I saw her over the course of 13 years, sometimes in Rome. I went to Calcutta a number of times. So, yes, I saw her many times, and as anybody who had encounters with her, she was the real deal. Really a very radiant person, but also she had her feet on the ground and a very attractive person, in terms of her humanity, but also she radiated, holiness, if you can say that. So she's a great person.
Was there any sense, and maybe just a little tongue-in-cheek, that she was a little intimidating? Because, she was a force, right? And so, but once you knew her and obviously drawn to that holiness, to Christ in her, just as she saw the Christ in the poorest of the poor, was there any sense that, okay, I better gird my loins and be ready to go here if I'm going to offer a message or anything?
Well, I think with Mother Teresa, she was a high-level saint. I think she was so humble also, not in a quiet way or no timidity in her, but she put people at ease quickly, and she was very focused on whoever was in front of her in the moment. So I think she had a way to put people at ease. Also, she was very attractive with her Slavic, grandmotherly way as well, although she had radiated strength also.
Mm-hmm. Wow, what a marvelous integration that she had as well. Maybe just as, in the book Contemplative Enigmas, I was struck, you speak about, at one point, the darkness that surrounds a man who cannot see may stir profound longings within his heart when he's aware of a presence of a loved one close by in the same room. After her death in particular, we came to know, Come Be My Light, the great spiritual darkness that she experienced for an extended period of her life. Does this experience kind of suggest what should be our attitude toward consolations in prayer, or should we look to befriend more the sense of absence or even darkness in prayer?
Well, I think if we read that account of Mother Teresa's darkness, which is in the work "Come Be My Light," published through the Missionaries of Charity, also, that was a high-level experience of a saint. What we would call even the dark night of the soul. I think all of us, go through not the dark night of the soul, but we do all have experience of God's concealment, like the ins and outs, the clouds and sun that are part of an ordinary life with God, and a perseverance, a steadiness in prayer, no matter what we are receiving or seem not to be receiving from God. The fact is He's there. If we go into a church or a chapel, He's there, in the tabernacle. He's there when we receive him. He's there at Mass. And we may experience something consoling, or we may not, but the reality is he's there, and he's giving himself to us. So we can't really know entirely what's happening, but the reality of his presence in concealment is a very steady reality of a spiritual life over many years.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, in the book, on the conversion, you have chapters devoted to the Eucharist in particular. The sense, then, of the presence and that conviction and faith of his presence. You address in the John of the Cross book, the Eucharist is a sacrament of great mystery in the intimacy of our union with our Lord. It's not honored sufficiently when souls seek an experience of emotional delight as their primary desire in Holy Communion. These are, that seeking that could be in a way opposed, and a kind of impurity of faith. And so the kind of self-emptying before the Eucharistic Lord that meets him in his outpouring of himself in that way. Do we have to make peace with a kind of ordinariness, or, you may have invoked the word boredom at one point, if I recall correctly. Just that disposition where just being there, and certainly no fireworks or anything else, but just being in the presence. Would we want to hope that God draws us into that place?
Well, I'm not sure, with all due respect, Bishop, I'm not sure I would say that. Okay, I don't think we would want to have boredom, before God. No. You spoke with Mother Theresa. I don't think these saints were ever bored. They did experience, an emptiness and longing. I think the reality is that there is a soul longing that does ignite, and burns. Sometimes as an undercurrent, beneath our awareness, but is very real. And when John of the Cross is very strong, even, almost ruthless about being careful not to indulge in self-seeking and indulgent type of prayer or approaches to God. And that's the problem sometimes of wanting emotional satisfaction, consolation, to feel, God. I've heard many times Mother Teresa's sisters naturally, would say sometimes to me, maybe in a conversation, I don't feel the presence of God as I did before. Well, that's actually perhaps, not what we should be seeking. Mm-hmm. The deeper reality of God is there. It's not to just be with him, but to long for him in that hiddenness. There's a great possibility of longing for God and putting words like that into, like we have in the Psalms. Mm-hmm. I long for you. My soul is thirsting for you. Mm-hmm. The dryness in my soul is, thirsting for you in this time. So I think that's the greater reality in prayer, that God does want to be yearned for. He does desire us to desire him, to thirst for him. But that may be very empty emotionally.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that this becomes a new kind of holy tension, if you will. We know and trust his presence there by faith. We have memory, perhaps, of times where we felt that intimacy, but then that unleashing of the longing becomes a kind of perpetual disposition of the heart that is never satiated in that as we're present before the Blessed Sacrament. My use of the term boredom was kind of a hypothetical, tongue-in-cheek. I was with a group of confirmandi yesterday and asking him, did you have experiences of adoration or anything? And there was a young man who kind of said, yeah, it was kind of boring at first, but praise God, he moved beyond that, and then that sense of felt presence, there. So, but I think you're charting, at least by my, modest understanding the trajectory of Theresa of Avila and something. With this is the way it goes, with God and how he deals with us in that respect. just a kind of provocative anecdote in the book Conversion, Spiritual Insights into an Essential Encounter with God. Early on, you give the story of the Jewish boy egged on by his Catholic companions in Paris at Notre Dame, which we look for it to reopen later this year. They encouraged him to simulate confession before a priest and receive the penance. Then the priest was very astute and knew that this was someone who was not really genuine in what he was about, but gave him the penance of presenting himself before a crucifix and saying 10 times, "I do not care what you suffered for me on that cross," and launched into that, but could only go 7 times of repetitions before melting down in tears. And so I just would ask you, what does that anecdote tell about the workings of God's grace, how overwhelming and compelling it is, and how our freedom is in play in that working of grace?
Well, that is a great story, I think, and I put it in the book, but it's a great story I heard, and then I wrote it down. But how personal God is, and, sometimes to allow, what was going to be a joke in some manner, these young boys, they're 13, 14 years old perhaps, 2 are Catholic, 1 is a Jewish boy, and to kind of, make fun, to have a little Jewish boy go into the confessional and fake a confession. But then that priest, must have been a holy priest, because he sent him to a side altar with a large crucifix, and then to say, as you mentioned, 10 times as your penance, what you suffered on the cross, I do not care about. And, and for him to look in the face of Jesus on the cross and say that. And it's just very striking how God can use such a moment. Certainly he was overwhelmed by grace. The real question there is, too, that could happen, and then you're very free afterwards. One thing to be struck by emotion in that moment. He became a Catholic after that, and the reality of our free choice of God, he always leaves us free, even as he may overwhelm sometimes, and in divine providence. And that would be an example of, God is the winner if we allow him to be the winner. He's very much, he is the one in control if we allow that.
Which is harder for some of us than others as well. Yeah, no, right. And then, as you say, and then what's next? God says, "What do you want after that?" That He's given us that, and maybe trying to kind of track in that same kind of theme and area of consideration from the John of the Cross book that you had. Quoting, Ascent to Mount Carmel. "As for God, who will stop him from accomplishing his desires in the soul that's resigned, annihilated, and despoiled? And that further a soul must suffer for the love of God. And seeking God as the beloved, it's impossible not to encounter satisfaction in our love for God." And so, if this question is valid in this context, is there a kind of chicken or egg paradox insofar that only a soul that's tasted the Lord's love and goodness and been satisfied is willing then to suffer seeking God? I mean, your book and, John himself, can draw us, it can attract us, but to will resignation and annihilation, do we first have to start with that experience of consolation?
Well, that's a good point, Bishop, because, would a person really risk, going far with God unless they've received some taste of, some appetizer, before they go, for the full meal? And there is a reality to that, and I think it is the case that, in the uniqueness of lives, that if we pay attention and we don't get too distracted and, too occupied with ourselves, that God is showing he is very real and personal, and he will be unique in his engagement with us. And if we begin to, take the steps, for instance, concretely, I try to suggest to young, I did it yesterday at Mass, to suggest to young people, why not go to Mass every day? Why not get into a church every day? Mm-hmm. You're single, you're in New York, you could do that. So if a person does take that step, for instance, in that example, something does begin to happen. And then there is a taste, and then, God gives a taste, and he's going to ask, something more. And so I think that's correct. There's a rhythm to this. As we respond and give, God also gives, and He extends and not so much demands, but He will stretch us, that much further.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's wonderful counsel, and I know you probably touched several hearts in a particular way. Praise God. I can certainly relate myself at a critical moment in my life, even though the faith was there early on, and the attraction to the Eucharist that would kind of been plateaued, but that reawakening when I was in professional school in Iowa City, Iowa, and the desire not just for Sunday, but for the daily Mass, prompted in part by a roommate of mine, and finding myself there, and then being willing, just whatever, God, and my plan had to be bent in that way. In counterpoint, in your conversion book, you refer to the malaise of indecisiveness that may afflict particularly youth or young people when confronted with that prompting to decide for Christ and offer themselves. Does our culture enable this sort of malaise and this kind of default attitude to keep one's options open? I mean, it's easy to be a cultural critic, but do you think that's perhaps part of what's in play with the nuns, the non-affiliated young people, or is there something else we need to consider?
Well, I think that's a very real problem. I mean, it's always been an issue, to make decisive choices and make commitments that, you go past the point of no return. And so if you get married, you become a priest. But I think the reality of this is also, when I wrote that book on conversion, my idea in writing that was it's not about becoming converted, but that time after a conversion is very ripe, before God for serious graces. Mm-hmm. And that is a key moment in one's life, and that 1 year, 2 years, 3 years after maybe a return to the practice of the faith, that in that time, God is probably going to look for a decisive act on our part. He may bring the person he's supposed to marry into your life, or he may, stir a person to a vocation to the priesthood or religious life or cloistered life.
I'm just going to, I did you an injustice, Father, in terms of proposing a substantive question, and now we need to take another pause. So hopefully, sure. We've got a teaser now for our listeners.
Stay with us as we do continue our conversation with Father Donald Haggerty from the Archdiocese of New York, and serves at St. Patrick's Parish, and author of many great books, all available at ignatius.com. You'll find his works there. You're listening to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen on Iowa Catholic Radio and the Spirit Catholic Radio.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by the Sarah Vocations Ministry, including the St. Sarah Club of Des Moines and the Sarah Club of Council Bluffs. Sarah is an apostolate of the Worldwide Catholic Church dedicated to fostering and supporting priesthood and religious vocations. Sarahs strive to accomplish their mission through prayer, fellowship, and service to the bishop, priests, sisters, and all in religious formation, and in doing so to increase their own holiness. Learn more at joinsarah.org, joinserra.org. Thank you, Sarahs, for your support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
Jimmy, do you take Judy to be your wife? To have and to hold? Uh-huh. For richer or poorer?
Okay.
Are you listening, Jimmy?
Jimmy?
Till death do you part?
Sure, right after I finish putting up this wall between us. There.
Jimmy, you're not dead yet.
When you use artificial contraception, it's like putting a wall between you and your spouse. Couples who instead regulate fertility naturally experience happier marriages and are less likely to divorce. Tear down the wall.
A message from Iowa Catholic Radio.
Welcome back to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen.
Thank you, Father Haggerty, for accenting the fact that the book Conversion is more about, not like, Augustine's Confession, the initial conversion, but that second conversion, and maybe then the temptation of a kind of malaise to still hold back. And was there any further grace notes you wanted to offer us in that regard?
Well, I think it's very true for young people. I see it in New York. I guess that's true throughout the country, that it's easy to be undecided and not to go forward in a commitment that you can't reverse. And some of that, when I've written about this, some of that has to do perhaps with this dependency on technology, where people get very fragmented sometimes in their attention. That may play out also in the absence of a serious concentration of what does God ask of my life, and And that's a key thing for happiness. My parents' generation, I'm sure you would say the same, Bishop, that they had a sense that, you commit and then you hold to it. And this leads to the great happiness of life, that in marriage or in the priesthood or religious life.
Indeed. So, no, that's where our joy lies. And certainly my own father, coming through Ellis Island, and born in 30 in the Bronx, so and then making his way to the Midwest. So, I think it's true for that generation, and hopefully that's something that becomes a hallmark as well. As I think we see that with young people, and it's hard for to have an adequate supply of spiritual directors. I think young people would benefit by a wise guide who can accompany them. We're doing our best. We have several centers here in the diocese, but perhaps your own ministry in that regard. What a blessing for people to have that. Shifting just a bit here, and our time is waning very quickly here. You speak directly to priests at a certain point in some of your chapters. That prophetic dimension of the priesthood, to be able to speak the truth, to have courage to face the challenges and the suffering that attends that. It's a thorny matter. How might priests walk the line between being prophetic in the sense you describe, and then kind of finding that joy of I've got the truth. I'm going to set people straight. Kind of pharisaical, whatever the consequences. Any thoughts in that regard? And has Pope Francis, his style of pastoral ministry, we love our Holy Father and are loyal to him, but does that sometimes make it challenging for parish priests in terms of that style of, inclusion, welcoming on the periphery, but also being pastorally courageous?
Well, I think it's a hard thing today, and we have popes will differ. Pope Francis is not Pope John Paul II, nor was Pope John Paul II Pius XII. So there's differences in that, but I think every man, who takes his priesthood seriously and is prayerful knows, we do have to be living for souls, and the salvation of souls is at stake. And it's not good to, in some manner, bracket, questions that need to be addressed at times, even by mention. I know at St. Patrick's Cathedral, because we have many visitors, we have a lot of people attend Mass on Sundays here, but many are visiting people who may not be going to Mass, every week. So I throw that out there often enough in the sermon, not preaching on that, but the necessity to go to Mass every Sunday as a Catholic. And I've mentioned, I throw it out there at times, this problem of the reception of communion, in sacrilege when you're, not going to Mass every Sunday. So, I think things have to be put out there in a way that's gentle, clear, not harping on or in some manner, speaking in a patronizing way, but for the sake of souls. I think if a priest is aware, look, souls are at stake. I don't want anybody to lose their soul. And I think our desire as priests has to be concerned with this, not just to take care of those who are in good shape, but the danger in many cases of a person ignoring their indifference to God. So there's
Amen. And Father, unfortunately, we've reached our time. I draw you out, and then your nuanced and wise responses. Thank you for the sacrifice of your time with us today, and I appreciate that. May God continue to speak to hearts through you, and hopefully someday we'll cross paths.
Thank you so much for having me, Bishop. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
This has been another edition of Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen. Thank you to our guest and all of our listeners who join us at Iowa Catholic Radio and the Spirit Catholic Radio Network.
You can hear Making It Personal with Bishop William Joensen every week on Iowa Catholic Radio and iowacatholicradio.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Making It Personal is provided by Sarah Vocations Ministry. Learn more at joinserra.org.